Welcome. There is no need to adjust anything. The pillow is fine. The blanket is fine. Whatever the room is doing, it is doing it without requiring your attention. And your attention is not needed for anything right now except this voice and this subject. And we are going to move through it slowly, carefully, without hurrying. Because this is that kind of story. Tonight we are going to talk about what it was like to be a slave in ancient Rome. Not the dramatic version. Not the gladiators and the revolts. Not the most extreme ends of the experience. We are going to talk about the daily version, the ordinary version, the version that was the lived reality of millions of people over hundreds of years, waking up in the morning in a particular place, doing particular work, eating particular food, having particular concerns, going to sleep at night in a particular way. This will take a long time. That is the point. Let us begin by acknowledging something important before we go. Further, the institution of slavery was a profound moral wrong, and the people who lived within it as enslaved persons lived constrained lives that were in many fundamental ways not their own. We are going to describe those lives with the same honest attention to the ordinary details that we have given to other ancient lives in this series. The ordinariness of it is itself part of the history, and understanding it clearly is worth doing. With that said, let us begin. Ancient Rome was a slave society in a way that modern people often underestimate. Slaves were not a marginal feature of Roman life. They were everywhere and in everything. Modern estimates suggest that in the city of Rome during the imperial period, perhaps 1 in 4 or even 1 in 3 people was enslaved. In the Italian countryside on the great agricultural estates called latifundia, the proportion was even higher. The Roman economy at every level depended on enslaved labour. These enslaved people came from everywhere the Roman army had gone, which was most of the known world. The conquest of a new territory produced slaves. The conquest of Gaul under Julius Caesar produced hundreds of thousands. The sack of Carthage, the conquest of Greece, the campaigns in Asia Minor, in Egypt, in Britain, in Dacia. Each one sent streams of enslaved people back to Italy and the other centres of Roman power. Slaves also came from the slave trade itself, from the great slave markets of the ancient world, most notably the island of Delos in the Aegean. Slave traders operated throughout the empire's borders and beyond, obtaining people through various means and selling them where the demand was greatest. And slaves were born into slavery. A child born to an enslaved woman was enslaved by that fact, regardless of the father's status. This meant that the institution reproduced itself independently of conquest. All of this is the background. Now let us get specific about a life. Let us imagine a slave in an upper-middle-class Roman household in the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era. The household has perhaps 10 or 15 slaves. The master is a moderately prosperous Roman citizen, perhaps a successful merchant, or a minor official, or an equestrian with investments in several businesses. He lives in a decent house in Rome, not the most fashionable neighbourhood, but comfortable. The slave we are following is a man in his 30s, perhaps originally from Syria, or from Greece, or from one of the Danubian provinces, brought to Rome as a young man, and now settled into the specific role he occupies in the household. He works as a general house slave. His name, as the Romans called him, was Latinized. We will call him Marcus for the purposes of this telling, knowing that his original name was part of an identity, that the institution of slavery had done much to obscure. Marcus wakes early, earlier than the family wakes, earlier than most of the city wakes. This is the first and most consistent feature of the slave's daily life. Waking before the household required service, being ready before being needed. He sleeps in the back part of the house, in a room shared with 2 or 3 other slaves. The sleeping space is small and not particularly comfortable. A straw mattress on a wooden platform or simply on the floor. A blanket in cold weather. The room has no window or a small one near the ceiling. In summer it is hot and airless. In winter it is cold. This sleeping space is his only genuinely private space, and it is barely private, shared with others, accessible to the master, not a place he chose or decorated or made his own in any significant way. It is simply where he sleeps. He rises in the semi-dark. He dresses, a simple tunic, the standard garment of the Roman slave and the Roman free worker alike. The quality of his tunic is modest but adequate. Romans who could afford to clothe their slaves adequately generally did so, not out of generosity but out of the practical understanding that a slave who was cold and poorly clothed was a less effective worker. He goes to the kitchen area of the house. The kitchen of a Roman house was a specific and important space. It contained the hearth, where cooking was done, the raised clay cooking surface above it, the storage for fuel and for the kitchen supplies. Marcus's first task this morning is to go to the fountain. Water supply in Rome was one of the city's genuine engineering achievements. The aqueducts brought water from springs in the hills outside the city, and the water was distributed through the city in pipes and channels to a series of public fountains, bathhouses, and, in the wealthiest households, private connections. Most Roman households relied on a public fountain nearby for their water supply. Marcus takes the water vessels and walks to the nearest fountain. This walk in the early morning is one of the specific experiences of the Roman domestic slave. The streets at this hour are not empty. Other slaves from other households are making the same journey, and traders are beginning to arrive in the city with their goods, and the bakeries have been working through the night. But the streets are quieter than they will be in a few hours. The fountain is a stone basin fed by the aqueduct pipe, the water running constantly. There might be a queue of people and slaves waiting to fill their vessels. Marcus joins the queue. He waits. He fills the vessels when his turn comes, the water cold and clean from the aqueduct source. He lifts the filled vessels, water is heavy, a full amphora is a significant load, and carries them back to the house. This errand takes perhaps half an hour. It is one of the first tasks of the day. Back in the house, the preparations for the morning continue. The Roman family's morning routine required service. The master had to be attended to as he woke, his clothes laid out, his wash water prepared. Marcus carries the warm water to the master's room. He sets out the master's morning garments. He is present and ready if needed, quiet and efficient in the specific way that a skilled household slave learned to be present without being intrusive. This is one of the more psychologically particular aspects of domestic slavery in Rome, the requirement to be present but invisible, available but not presumptuous, attentive but not intrusive. The slave in constant proximity to their owner had to develop a specific kind of awareness, reading the owner's mood, anticipating needs, responding quickly without appearing to have been waiting. This awareness was itself a skill. The morning continues. The family eats their breakfast, a a modest morning meal, as the Romans generally ate most substantially in the later part of the day. The slaves have also eaten, or will eat, a simpler version of the same food. The food of the slaves in a Roman household varied by the prosperity of the household and the generosity of the master, but in general slaves received adequate if simple food: bread, oil, salt, olives, occasionally wine, vegetables when available. The basic caloric needs were met because a malnourished slave was a less productive slave. After breakfast, the day's work begins in earnest. The work of a household slave was various and unending. The house needed to be cleaned, the floors swept, the mosaic pavements washed, the walls wiped down. The furniture needed to be moved for cleaning and replaced. The lamps needed to be cleaned and refilled with oil for the evening. The latrine needed to be maintained. The kitchen needed to be kept clean, and the provisions managed. Messages needed to be carried from the household to other households, or to the master's business contacts. Marcus is given his assignments for the day. One of his regular tasks is the cleaning of the atrium, the central room of the Roman house, the formal space that was the first room encountered when entering from the street, where clients came to see the master, where the household shrine was kept. The atrium had specific features. The compluvium, an opening in the roof that admitted light and air. Below it, the impluvium, a shallow rectangular pool in the floor that caught rainwater. The walls were painted with frescoes. The floor was mosaic or marble. The household shrine, the lararium dedicated to the household god, stood in a corner. The cleaning of this room was a careful business. The impluvium needed to be cleared of any leaves or debris. The mosaic floor needed to be swept and then washed with water. The furniture needed to be moved, the floor under it cleaned, and the furniture returned to its proper arrangement. The lararium needed to be tended. Marcus does this work methodically. He has done it hundreds of times. The movements are familiar, the sequence established by habit. He knows this room as well as he knows anything. Every tile of the mosaic, the specific stain that has been on the south wall for years, the angle at which the morning light comes through the compluvium and illuminates the frescoes on the west wall. The frescoes on the west wall show a garden scene. Painted plants and birds, a common decorative choice in Roman houses. Marcus has stood before these painted plants more times than he can count. They are simply part of the room, as familiar as the impluvium and the lararium. He finishes the atrium. He moves to the next task. This is the texture of the slave's working day, a sequence of tasks, each completed and replaced by the next, the house maintaining its condition through this constant work, the family moving through it without needing to think about how it is maintained. Let us now think about the social world of the Roman slave. Marcus is not isolated. He lives and works alongside the other slaves of the household, and these relationships with people who share his condition, who understand from the inside what his daily life is, were real and important. The slaves of a Roman household formed a community, the familia serviles, the slave household within the household. This community had its own internal hierarchies and relationships. The steward managed the other slaves, a position of considerable internal authority. The cook held a special position if skilled. The educated slave, the secretary, the tutor, the reader, had a different kind of status, based on intellectual skills. Marcus occupied a middle position in this hierarchy. He was competent and reliable. He had been in the household long enough to have established relationships with the other slaves, to know their characters and their stories. The stories of his fellow slaves were various. The woman who managed the household supplies had come from a Greek-speaking family in Asia Minor. She had been enslaved as a child and had no clear memory of any other life. The man who served at table had been a free artisan in Gaul before being enslaved during a military campaign. He was older and still carried the consciousness of having had a different life. The young man who ran errands had been born in the household, the child of another slave, and had never known anything but this life. These differences in origin and history created different kinds of people within the same institution. The one who remembered freedom might feel its absence more acutely. The one who had never known anything else had different reference points. The conversations among the household slaves, during the brief periods when they were not under immediate supervision, were the conversations of people who shared a situation and understood each other from within it. The master's mood today, the particular demands that the mistress had made, the quality of the food, the gossip about the household, the small injustices and small reliefs of the day. There was humour in these conversations. The Romans noted that slaves were often sharp observers of their masters, that the intimate access they had to the daily life of the household gave them a perspective that was often ironic. Let us now think about the midday. Rome was organized by the same logic as other hot climate civilizations. The intense midday heat required a pause. The slave's day was not typically structured to give a genuine midday break, in the same way the free worker might take one. There was always something that needed doing. But the pace of work during the hottest part of the day was typically lower. Marcus, in the midday hours, might be given less active tasks, the mending of household items, the cleaning of small objects, the sorting of supplies, or he might be sent on an errand through the city. Moving through Rome as a slave was a specific experience. The city was enormous by ancient standards, a city of perhaps 1 million people, dense and loud and full of the overlapping sounds and smells of many thousands of simultaneous activities. The slave did not wear a distinguishing mark that announced their status under most circumstances. There was in fact a discussion in Roman legal and philosophical sources about whether slaves should be required to wear identifying clothing, and the conclusion was that they should not, because making slaves visually identifiable as a group would make them aware of their numbers, and awareness of numbers might encourage solidarity and revolt. This is a revealing discussion. It shows that the Romans understood the fragility of the institution. The markets were one of the regular destinations for slave errands. The slaves sent to the market to buy provisions moved through these spaces with the particular authority of someone spending their master's money on specific items. This small authority was one of the more interesting aspects of the slave's position in the city. When buying on behalf of the master, the slave negotiated prices, assessed quality, made decisions about what to purchase. Within the scope of the errand, they had real autonomy of action. Now let us think about the afternoon. In the afternoon, the household prepared for the cena, the dinner. For a household with any social pretensions, dinner was important. It was the occasion for hospitality, for the reinforcement of social bonds, for the display of the household's prosperity. The kitchen slaves worked through the afternoon on the preparation. multiple courses in a more ambitious dinner, the gustatio, the appetizer course, the prima and secunda mensa, the main courses, the dessert of fruit and sweet preparations. The slaves who would serve at table were also preparing. Serving at a Roman dinner was a skilled and choreographed function. The courses had to appear at the right moments. The wine had to be mixed and served correctly. Romans customarily mixed their wine with water. The performance of a Roman dinner service was a visible expression of the household's competence. Marcus serves at the dinner. Serving at a Roman dinner meant standing in attendance through the meal, standing, not sitting, while the guests reclined on their dining couches and ate and talked. The slave stood ready to respond to any request, to fill a cup, to remove a plate, to bring the next course when signalled. This standing in attendance through a dinner that might last 2 or 3 or 4 hours was its own specific experience. You were present but not participating. You heard the conversation of the guests but were not part of it. You were the furniture, in a sense, necessary, expected, present but not acknowledged. Some slaves managed this state better than others. Some found the way to be genuinely absent in mind while present in body, to let the conversation wash over them without attending to it, to achieve a kind of internal stillness while maintaining external readiness. The dinner ends, the guests leave, the kitchen must be cleaned, the dining room put in order. This work happens in the evening under the dim light of the oil lamps. Oil lamps in a Roman house gave a small, warm, yellow light. The work done by lamplight was work done in a circle of light surrounded by shadow. The slave who worked in the kitchen in the evening was working in that light, the room around them in semi-darkness. The cleaning of the kitchen was done efficiently, by people who had done it many times. The dishes and pots were scraped and washed with water. The cooking surface was cleaned. The remains of the food were disposed of. The kitchen was returned to a state of readiness for the next day. This work, done in the evening, was the end of the working day. And then the slaves returned to their sleeping space. In the sleeping space, the requirements of the household were somewhat suspended. You were not on duty. The need to be ready and present and efficient was reduced, though not eliminated. But in the hours of the night there was a version of rest that was the slave's own. The conversation of the evening winds down among the household slaves. The day's events discussed in the particular way that people who share a small space and a large common experience discuss things. One of the others, the older man from Gaul, the one who remembers freedom, is not sleeping yet. He is lying on his back in the dark, and you can tell from his breathing that he is awake and thinking. He does not speak, and Marcus does not speak to him. Some moods are understood and respected. The young man who was born in the household falls asleep quickly, as young people do, his breathing evening out into the deeper rhythm of sleep within minutes. Marcus lies in the dark. His body is tired. The day has been long, and the work physical, and the evening service at dinner required the sustained attention that is its own kind of effort. The tiredness is real, and it pulls towards sleep, but for a moment he is awake in the dark. This moment, lying awake in the dark before sleep comes, is universal. It is the same moment regardless of the century or the culture or the legal status of the person in it. The body has done its work. The mind is winding down. Sleep is coming but has not yet arrived. You're in the interval between waking and sleeping. What he thinks about in this moment, we cannot know. The Romans who wrote about slavery did not record the private thoughts of enslaved people lying awake in the dark. Those thoughts are lost with the people who had them. The sound of the city outside continues, the carts moving on the night streets, distant voices, the sounds that Rome made all night. But the body's need for sleep is stronger than the city's noise, and sleep comes, as it comes to everyone eventually, and the night passes over the sleeping city, and over the sleeping household, and over the sleeping slave. As it passes now over you, sleep, good night. The range of conditions. The life of an enslaved person in Rome was not uniform. It varied enormously by the specific role they occupied, the specific master they had, the specific city or countryside or mine or ship where they lived and worked. On one end of the spectrum were the educated slaves, the Greeks and Syrians and Egyptians who came from more literate cultures, who had been educated in rhetoric and philosophy and medicine and mathematics, who became the tutors and secretaries and doctors and librarians of wealthy Roman households. These enslaved people occupied positions of genuine intellectual importance. The philosopher Epictetus had been a slave before his manumission. He had been owned by one of Nero's freedmen and had been allowed to study philosophy while enslaved, eventually becoming one of the most important Stoic philosophers of the ancient world. His writings about freedom and constraint and the inner life are shaped throughout by his experience of external slavery. The Greek tutor in a wealthy Roman household occupied a position of remarkable ambiguity. He taught the master's children everything that mattered in Roman elite education, grammar and rhetoric and philosophy and the literature that was the currency of educated society. He was in daily intimate contact with the family's children, shaping their minds, and he was enslaved. On the other end of the spectrum were the slaves of the mines. The mines were the worst. The tunnels were narrow and low, requiring workers to crouch or crawl. The air was foul from the burning torches. The rock was broken with hammers and chisels, a slow and physically brutal process. The ore was carried out in baskets through cramped tunnels in conditions of almost complete darkness. The death rate was high. The working conditions were lethal over the medium term. The slave sent to the mines was expected to work until they could not, and then to die, and to be replaced. The mines were where the empire sent the people it wanted to disappear. These were the same institution. The tutor in the wealthy household and the miner in the silver mines were both legally slaves. The distance between their conditions was the full distance of the spectrum. Most enslaved people occupied positions between these extremes. The agricultural slaves on the latifundia did field work in conditions that were generally harder than urban household slavery, but not as extreme as the mines. They lived in barracks on the estate, worked under the supervision of an overseer, and had less connection to the broader life of the city than the urban domestic slave. The living conditions on the estate were basic. The barracks, ergastula, were dormitory-style buildings, sometimes semi-underground, where the slaves slept in minimal conditions. Columella, the Roman agricultural writer, recommended that masters inspect them regularly to ensure adequate conditions, which implies that conditions were often not adequate. The agricultural slaves' social world was the world of the gang. The other slaves they worked alongside, the overseer who supervised them, and very little else. The estate might be far from any town. Movement off the estate was restricted. And yet social worlds existed here too. Relationships formed, children were born. Some masters permitted and even encouraged the formation of slave families on estates, because a slave with family connections was a slave less likely to run away. The religious life religion in Rome was not the separated private matter it has become in modern secular societies. It was woven through daily life, present in the household shrines and public temples, in the festivals and the calendar. The slave participated in the religious life of the household, but slaves also had their own religious lives, separate from the master's religion. The variety of religious traditions represented in the slave population, Greek, Syrian, Jewish, Egyptian, Gaulish, Dacian, and many others, meant that the slave quarters contained a diversity of private spiritual practices. The cult of Isis was particularly popular among slaves in Rome. This Egyptian goddess, whose myth involved loss and search, and reunion and resurrection, had a resonance with people who had experienced displacement and loss. Her temples in Rome were active and attended. The Jewish community in Rome included both free people and slaves, and the synagogues were spaces where slaves could participate in a religious community that existed to some degree outside the master's household. The early Christian communities similarly included enslaved members, and the Christian message of human equality before God had a specific resonance in this population. These religious communities, the Temple of Isis, the synagogue, the early house church, were spaces where the slave existed as something other than a piece of property, as a worshipper, as a community member, as a person with a soul in the religious understanding of the tradition. The peculium. The peculium was the small amount of personal property that a slave was allowed to accumulate and manage, with the master's permission and technically within the master's ownership. In practical terms, it was the slave's own resource: money, tools, small goods. The peculium could be built over time through various means. The slave who managed the household accounts might retain a small percentage of savings. The skilled craftsman who was hired out to other masters might be permitted to keep a portion of his earnings. The slave who conducted commercial transactions on the master's behalf might be given incentives to do so profitably. The formal purpose of the peculium in the minds of many masters was the purchase of freedom. A slave who had accumulated enough, and the price was set by the master, which meant the master had complete control over when and whether this became possible, could in theory buy their freedom. The master received the purchase price, and the slave became a libertus, a freed person, a Roman citizen of lower standing, but a citizen nonetheless. Manumission, the freeing of a slave, was not rare in Roman society. It happened regularly for various reasons: a master's gratitude for long service, the desire to reward a particularly valuable or trusted slave, the dying master who freed his slaves in his will. Marcus has been accumulating his peculium for years. It is not large. It is a small pottery jar with coins in it, kept in his specific corner of the sleeping room, known to the other slaves, understood to be his and not to be touched. He checks it sometimes, not because it changes frequently, but because looking at it confirms its reality. The coins are there. The sum is what it was the last time he checked. Time is passing. The jar is slowly, very slowly filling. Whether this accumulation would ever be enough, and whether his master would ever set a price and honour it, was not certain. Many masters did, some did not. The institution offered the possibility without guaranteeing the outcome, but the jar was there, and the coins were there, and the project, which was something more grounded and more actionable than hope, was there. What could not be chosen? Let us be clear about what was not ordinary about Marcus's situation, the specific ways in which the constraint manifested. He could not leave. That is the fundamental thing. He was property, legally, and property did not leave. If he were to run away, and slaves did run away, there are records of runaway slave notices in Roman sources, the consequences if caught were severe, including branding, beatings, and the wearing of a collar with an inscription asking for the slave to be returned to their master. He could not refuse work he was given, except at the risk of punishment. The forms of punishment available to Roman masters varied from the relatively mild, reduced food rations, verbal abuse, to the extreme, physical beatings, torture, crucifixion. Roman law placed some limits on the absolute power of masters over slaves, and these limits increased somewhat over the imperial period, but the fundamental right of the master to physically punish their slave was maintained. He could not form legally recognized relationships. Marriage between slaves was not recognized in Roman law. Partnerships were formed, children were born, families existed in practice, but they had no legal protection. The master could sell the partner, sell the child, separate what the slave had built. He was someone's property. This is the foundation beneath everything else we have described. The morning fetch of water, the cleaning of the atrium, the service at dinner, the evening conversation with fellow slaves. All of it was the life of a person who was owned, and yet the people who lived within this institution lived. They formed their relationships, maintained their inner lives, found what pleasures they could find, managed their situations with the intelligence and the resilience that humans bring to whatever circumstances they find themselves in. The institution was wrong, and the lives lived within it were real lives. Both things are true. Both things are part of the history. The night again. The night comes. Marcus lies down. The sleeping room is small and dark. The others are settling around him. Outside, the city of Rome continues. Rome was a city that never fully went quiet. The daytime restrictions on wheeled traffic, meaning that the carts and wagons that supplied the city moved at night, producing a continuous noise of wheels on stone. The jar of coins is in its corner. The older man from Gaul lies awake thinking. The young man who was born here is already asleep, and Marcus lies in the dark and lets the day go. Not in a philosophical way, simply in the way that tired people let the day go when the body's need for sleep becomes stronger than anything else. The day recedes, the night comes in, and sleep, as it comes to everyone, as it comes to you, in the dark, at the end of the day, after the work, before the morning. Good night. What the philosopher said Epictetus wrote that some things are within our power while others are not. Within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, and what is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, our reputation, and whatever is not of our own doing. He wrote this as a man who had been enslaved and who had thought deeply about what the condition of slavery meant for the question of freedom. He concluded that the external condition of the body, whether enslaved or free, was not the condition of the self. This is a beautiful philosophy, and it was also, from another perspective, a philosophy that made enslavement more bearable for the enslaved without challenging the institution itself. The Stoics did not campaign for the abolition of slavery. They recommended humane treatment. They counseled the enslaved to maintain their inner freedom. They did not attack the institution. This gap between the philosophical recognition that slavery was wrong and the practical acceptance of the institution is one of the most revealing things about the ancient world and about the limits of moral progress before the development of the ideas and the movements that eventually brought those ideas to bear in the form of abolitionism. The institution ended eventually, not because the Romans or the Greeks recognized that it should end, because the empire ended and the economy changed, and eventually the abolition movements of the 18th and 19th centuries did what the Stoics had not done. They connected the philosophical recognition that slavery was wrong to the political project of ending it. But that is many centuries away from the sleeping room in the Roman house. Tonight, in the sleeping room, the philosophy is not what matters. What matters is the body's need for rest and the availability of sleep. And those are the same in every century. Good night. The morning after. The morning comes to the slave as it comes to everyone. The light through the small vent in the wall, the sounds of the city resuming its daytime character, the roosters, the voices, the beginning movement of a city waking. He wakes, and the day begins again, the same as yesterday, the same as tomorrow. In this sameness, this repetition, this daily return to the same tasks in the same house, there was a kind of order. Not the order of freedom, not the order of a life chosen and shaped by one's own decisions, but order of a kind. The history of ancient Rome is incomplete if it is told only from the perspective of the free. The slaves who maintained the houses worked the fields, educated the children, kept the records, built the monuments. They were Rome too. Their labour was Rome's labour. Their lives were part of Rome's life, and their daily lives. The fetching of water, the cleaning of the atrium, the service at dinner, the conversation in the sleeping room, the tired body lying down in the dark, were lives, lived from the inside, with all the texture that any life has when it is lived from the inside. And now the night is here, and the sleeping room is quiet, and the city is making its nighttime sounds outside, and sleep is here. Good night. The texture of the day, slowly. Let us go through the texture of the day one more time, very slowly, just the sensory details. The cold of the stone floor in the sleeping room before the day had warmed it, the bare feet on the cold stone in the early morning, the weight of the full amphora of water carried from the fountain, the specific pressure of the rim on the palm of the hand, the counterbalancing of the weight on the shoulder, the smell of the warm water in the basin prepared for the master's morning wash, the steam rising from it in the cooler air of the early morning, the sound of the broom on the mosaic floor of the atrium, the specific sound of dry bristles on stone, the smell of the oil used to polish the bronze lamp holders, sharp and slightly astringent, the lamp holder brightening under the cloth as you rubbed, the sound of the kitchen at noon, the hiss of oil, the sound of liquid being stirred in a pot, the feeling of the midday heat in the courtyard, the sun direct overhead, moving quickly through the heat to the next task, the smell of the wine being served at dinner, the particular smell of Roman wine, often sweetened or spiced, diluted with water, the weight of a full tray carried from the kitchen to the dining room, the concentration required to carry it without spilling, the doorway to negotiate, the standing in the dining room through the long dinner, the feet beginning to feel the standing after the first hour, the coolness of the evening air after the heat of the day, felt when the door was opened for the departing guests, the smell of the kitchen being cleaned in the lamplight, the water, the food residue, the scrubbing, the return to the sleeping room, the dim light, the other slaves settling, the mat under the back, the blanket, the ceiling dark above, the sounds of the city outside diminished now, the breathing of the others, and sleep. This is the texture of the day. Small sensory moments, one after another, adding up to the hours, and at the end the same. The mat, the dark, the breathing, and sleep. Your day also had its texture, its specific sensory moments, one after another, and now it has reached its end, and the mat is under you, or the mattress, or whatever your version of the sleeping place is, and the dark is here, and the breathing of whatever is near you, and sleep, your sleep, available, real, now, good night. The city at night, Rome at night, had its own character, distinct from the Rome of the day. During the day, the streets of Rome were crowded with pedestrians, and with the small carts and litters and sedan chairs that were permitted within the city walls during daylight hours. The streets were noisy with voices and vendors and the sounds of commerce and the countless activities of a city of 1 million people. At night, the wheeled traffic that was banned during the day entered the city. The wagons and carts that supplied Rome, the grain wagons, the stone wagons for the endless construction, the delivery carts for the merchants and the shopkeepers, moved through the streets in the night hours, producing the continuous sound of wheels on stone that Juvenal complained about so memorably. This nighttime noise was the background of the slave's sleep, not silence, not in Rome. The city continued its commerce in the dark, and the people who slept in it slept against the soundtrack of the city's nighttime activity. But the human body's need for sleep was not defeated by this noise. The body adapted, as it always adapts to the consistent conditions of its environment, and the sound of the nighttime city became simply the sound of night, the background against which sleep was achieved. The Roman slave sleeping in the back room of the master's house was sleeping in the city, inside the city's noise, inside the city's perpetual motion, and sleeping nonetheless. The tiredness of the day's work was stronger than the city's noise. The slaves from quieter parts of the empire, from the countryside of Gaul or the rural hinterland of Syria, found the noise of Rome striking when they first arrived. In the countryside, the night was genuinely quiet, or quiet in the relative way of places where the sounds were natural sounds rather than the sounds of human activity. In Rome, there was no such quiet. Rome was Rome all night long. After the first weeks and months, the city's noise became simply the texture of the night. You slept in it. You woke in it. It was the background of your life, as the sounds of your own environment are the background of your life, whatever those sounds are tonight. The city, if you are in a city, the country, if you are in the country, the house with its specific sounds, the background, and in the background, sleep. Good night. The children of slaves in Rome. In many Roman households, the children of enslaved people were present. Born into the household, they were enslaved from birth, and their growing up happened within the institution. These children, the verni, occupied a specific position. They were familiar to the family, having been present since birth, sometimes treated with something approaching affection by the master and mistress. They were also property. The Werner who grew up in a household knew the family and the house, and the routines with the intimacy of someone who had never known anything else. This knowledge was their great competence and also their great constraint. They were specialized for this specific situation. The children of slaves played with the master's children in the early years, the distinctions of status less immediately felt in childhood. And then, as they grew, the distinction reasserted itself. The master's child received education and preparation for civic life. The slave child received training in the tasks they would perform as adult slaves. These parallel childhoods, so close in the early years and then diverging, were one of the more poignant dimensions of the institution as it operated at the household level. The Verni sleep in the slave quarters tonight, small and breathing, and in the only world they have known, as children sleep everywhere, in whatever world they were given, without asking for the world and receiving it anyway, and finding in it what there is to find, which includes sleep. Good night. The last word tonight, the institution of slavery in Rome was maintained not by the unanimous consent of the enslaved. Enslaved people resisted it in countless ways, large and small, from the spectacular revolts of Spartacus to the daily small resistances of work slowed and tasks done imprecisely, but by the overwhelming power of the state and the master class. The enslaved people of Rome were not a uniform mass. They were individuals, from dozens of different cultures and backgrounds, with different skills and different experiences and different inner lives. They thought their own thoughts in their own languages, in the private spaces of their minds, regardless of what the institution demanded of their bodies. The history is incomplete without them. These slaves who built the Colosseum, who decorated the villas, who educated the children, who maintained the households, who worked the fields and the mines, they were part of the story, and their lives, however constrained, were real. And now the night is here, and Marcus is sleeping, and the other slaves of his household are sleeping, and the slaves of 10,000 other Roman households are sleeping, and the agricultural slaves on the Italian estates are sleeping, and the philosophers and the gladiators and the educators and the doctors among the enslaved are sleeping. All of them, in whatever sleeping place was theirs, in the dark, after the work of the day, and the city is making its nighttime sounds around all of them, and the night holds all of them as it holds everything, without judgment and without distinction, in the dark, in the quiet, within the noise, in the simple necessity of rest, and you are held too, in the same dark, in the same night, after your own day, in your own version of the sleeping place, and sleep is available to you as it was available to all of them. The same sleep, the same dark, the same rest. Take it. Good night. The freedman, the libitus, the freed person, occupied a specific place in Roman society that was neither the slave's place nor the freeborn citizen's place. When a slave was manumitted, they became a Roman citizen, which was a genuine change in legal status. They could own property, enter into contracts, appear in court. In the city of Rome, where a large proportion of the free population was of freedman descent within a generation or two, the freedman was a recognized and normal social figure. But the freedman carried the past. The relationship with the former master, now the patron, continued in formal terms. The freedman owed obligations to the patron, certain kinds of work, a portion of their time, deference and loyalty. The patron owed obligations to the freedman, protection, support if needed. This patron-client relationship was fundamental to Roman social structure at every level, and the freed slaves' entry into it was their entry into the formal social world of Rome. They were no longer property, they were now embedded in a network of obligation and reciprocity. Some freed people did very well. The imperial freedmen who served as administrators of the emperor's household became some of the most powerful people in the empire, managing vast resources and making decisions that affected millions. These were extreme cases, but they illustrate the possibility that freedom, once achieved, could open toward genuine prosperity and influence. Most freed people did more modestly well. They pursued trades and crafts. They opened businesses. They accumulated property. They married and had children who were freeborn citizens. Within 1 or 2 generations, the slave origin could be distant enough to be irrelevant. The jar of coins in Marcus's sleeping room was pointed toward this. The small, slow accumulation of the peculium was the work of someone imagining a life beyond the current one, a life in which the day's tasks were not assigned but chosen, in which the sleeping space was one's own, in which the streets of Rome were navigated not on another's errand but on one's own. Whether that life would materialize was not certain, but the jar was there, and the coins were there, and the night was here, and sleep was here, and the morning would come, and the day after that, and slowly, very slowly, the jar was filling. Good night. The light of the lamps. The oil lamps of Rome gave a specific quality of light, not the bright white, even light of modern electric lighting, not the flickering yellow of a candle. The oil lamp, a flat clay vessel with a wick of plant fibre floating in a pool of olive oil, gave a small, warm, amber light that illuminated the immediate vicinity and left the rest of the room in shadow. To work by lamplight in a Roman house was to work in a pool of warmth surrounded by dark. The face and the hands caught the light, and the walls retreated. The lamp made the space intimate and small, regardless of the size of the room. The slaves who worked the kitchen in the evening hours worked in this light. The cook bending over the final preparations, the server arranging the last dishes, the cleaner at the end of the evening with the scrubbing cloth and the water vessel, all of them in their pools of amber light, working in the kitchen that was so familiar it could be navigated without light, but that the lamp made visible and warm. In the sleeping room there was sometimes a lamp, sometimes not. The sleeping room did not require light for sleeping, and oil was a cost. In the master's household, the allocation of lamp oil to the slave quarters was a practical calculation, enough for what was needed, not more. But sometimes there was light, a small lamp left burning for the hour between the end of the evening work and the settling into sleep. In that lamplight the small room was visible, the mats, the blankets, the few personal items arranged against the walls, the jar of coins in Marcus's corner, the faces of the others in the lamplight. The older man from Gaul sitting on his mat with the expression he wore in the evenings, not sad exactly, not bitter exactly, but carrying something. The young man who was born here, relaxed and easy in the only world he had known. And then the lamp guttered and went out, or was extinguished to save the oil, and the room was dark, and the day was over, and sleep was the next thing, as it is the next thing now. The lamp is out, the room is dark, and sleep is here. Good night. The streets of Rome. At dawn. In the very early morning, before full dawn, the night's wheeled traffic was retreating, and the day's foot traffic had not yet fully arrived. There was an interval, brief, specific, when the streets of Rome were quieter than they were at any other hour. The slave who went to the fountain in this interval moved through a city in transition. The last carts of the night were finishing their rounds. The bakers, who had been working through the night, were sending out the first loads of bread for the day. The charcoal sellers were setting up. The water carriers were making their first rounds. The air was cool and had the quality of early morning air everywhere, fresher than the day's air, lighter, not yet weighted by the heat and the accumulation of the day's activity. The sky to the east was lightening, not yet the sun, but the sky paling from black to deep blue to lighter blue in the direction where the sun would rise. The fountain was running. It always ran. The aqueduct water did not stop at night. The stone basin was full, and the water ran over the edge into the channel that carried the overflow away. Marcus filled his vessels. The water was cold. The stone of the fountain was cold under his hands. The air was cool on his face. He lifted the full vessels. He turned toward the house. The city was waking around him, the sounds of the morning beginning to accumulate. Voices, the creak of shutters being opened, the sound of someone sweeping nearby. He walked back. The house door was open for him. He entered. The day had begun, as it always begins, as it begins again tomorrow. But that is tomorrow. Tonight is tonight, and the fountain is silent, and the door is closed, and the day is done, and the night is here, and sleep is here, complete, available, yours, take it, good night. All those who slept in Rome. All those who slept in Rome tonight. The emperor in his palace on the Palatine Hill, surrounded by his guards and his attendants and the apparatus of power. The senator in his domus on the Caelian Hill, his household of perhaps 50 slaves around him. The merchant in his apartment near the Tiber, his books of accounts on the table nearby. The freedman in his rented room above the shop where he works, having come further than he expected and still wanting further. The free worker in the insula, the apartment block, where 4 families share a floor that was never designed for comfort. The beggar at the edge of the forum sleeping on stone under a torn cloak, and Marcus, and the other slaves of his household, and the slaves of 10,000 other households, and the agricultural slaves in the barracks on the estates in the countryside, all of them sleeping in the same night, under the same stars insofar as anyone could see the stars through the smoke and the dense fabric of the city. All of them with bodies that needed rest. All of them in the dark. All of them in whatever version of the sleeping place was theirs. Some of them dreaming. Some of them in the blank deep sleep below dreaming. All of them in the fundamental condition of sleep, which is the same regardless of what the day has been or who you are or what your situation is. The sleep holds everyone equally, as the night holds everyone equally, and you are held in the same holding, in the same night, after your own day, in your own dark, and sleep is here, real, complete, available now. Good night. The atrium at different hours. The atrium that Marcus cleaned each morning looked different at different times of day, and this variation was one of the more interesting features of the work. Not that Marcus thought of it that way, but the room was genuinely different depending on the hour. In the early morning, when he arrived to begin cleaning, the atrium had the quality of a room that had been unoccupied for hours. The air was still. The light from the compluvium was the early light, low-angled, coming from the east, illuminating the west wall of the room and leaving the east wall in relative shadow. The frescoes on the west wall were bright in this light, the painted birds vivid, the painted foliage sharp. The impluvium water was still, reflecting the rectangle of early sky visible through the compluvium above. On a clear morning, the reflection showed the pale blue of the early sky, and the sun had not yet reached the angle where it would appear in the rectangle of the compluvium. The reflection was the sky, and the sky above was the sky, and for a brief moment the atrium contained both. Marcus did not linger over this. He swept the floor, swept the leaves from the impluvium, began the work of the morning. By midday, when clients came to see the master and the atrium was in active use, the light was different. The sun was at an angle where it came directly through the compluvium, a sharp shaft of light falling on the floor and the impluvium, the rest of the room bright with reflected light from all the lit surfaces. The room was at its most visible, and also at its most public, the space serving its formal function as the face of the household. Marcus, if he was in the atrium during client hours, was part of the household's presentation, one of the attending slaves, present and useful and part of the scene. By evening, with the lamps lit, the atrium changed again. The lamplight was warm and directional, the shadows deep, the frescoes on the walls visible in the lamp's glow but darker and more mysterious than in daylight. The compluvium above was a rectangle of dark sky. The impluvium was black water reflecting the lamp flames as small bright points. Marcus cleaned this room in the evening after the last visitor had left, restoring its order for the next morning, and in the night, with no lamps and no occupants, the atrium was dark and still, the compluvium admitting a rectangle of starlit sky, the water in the impluvium reflecting the stars. A room that was different at every hour and the same room throughout, as the day was different at every hour and the same day throughout. And now the day is its final version, the night version, dark, still, the working parts of it finished, and sleep is the atrium's night version, the resting version, the still version, everything in order, the floor cleaned, the lamps out, the stars in the impluvium's reflection. Good night, the work of maintenance. The great works of ancient Rome, the temples, the baths, the aqueducts, the forums, the basilicas, are what survive. They are what we see when we think of Rome, what the images show, what the histories discuss. But the maintenance of daily life in Rome, the cleaning and the cooking and the carrying and the errand running and the water fetching and all the rest, this maintenance was the work of the enslaved. And this work, done continuously and invisibly, was the foundation on which the visible grandeur rested. The temple was built by enslaved labourers. The temple was cleaned by enslaved workers. The priest who conducted the rituals in the temple ate food prepared by an enslaved cook, wore a garment laundered by an enslaved person, was attended to from waking to sleeping by enslaved attendants. The historian who wrote the history of Rome ate food prepared by slaves, dictated to a slave secretary, read by lamplight that a slave had filled and trimmed. The senator who gave the speech that the historian recorded had been educated by a slave tutor, was dressed by a slave attendant, spoke from a position of wealth maintained by slave labour. This is not a critique of the individuals exactly. It is a description of the system. The system was the Roman economy, and the Roman economy was built on enslaved labour, and the contributions of that labour were as real as any other contribution to the civilization, even when they went unacknowledged. Marcus, cleaning the atrium each morning, was maintaining the space in which the master's public life was conducted. The atrium that received the clients, that impressed the visitors, that signalled the household's prosperity and standing. This atrium was what it was because Marcus and the other household slaves kept it that way. This was a real contribution. It was unacknowledged. It was unchosen. It was made under constraint. But it was real. The history of Rome is the history of all of it. The emperor and the slave, the senator and the cook, the philosopher and the person whose labour supported the philosopher's ability to think. All of it. And now the working day of all of them is done, and the night holds all of it, and sleep is available to all of it. And you are in the night, and the working day is done, and sleep is available now. Good night. The jar of coins. Again, the jar of coins in the corner of Marcus's sleeping room. Let us stay with it for a moment. It is a small clay jar, the same kind of jar that the household uses for various purposes. It has a fitted lid of clay. It is not locked, not hidden. Hiding it would suggest distrust of the other slaves, and trust between them was something worth maintaining. Inside the jar are coins. Sesterti mostly. Small denominations, the coins of daily transaction, each one added at a specific moment, after a piece of work done for someone outside the household, after a transaction in which Marcus was permitted to retain a small percentage, after some small economy, that the master allowed to become part of the peculium. They add up slowly, very slowly. The total in the jar, after years of accumulation, is not large in absolute terms. In relative terms, relative to the price of a slave's freedom, which the master would set based on the slave's value and the master's inclination, it is a fraction, a significant fraction perhaps, or a small fraction. It is hard to know because the master's price has not been discussed. The jar sits in its corner, patient as the slave who accumulates it, as patient as the night that is passing, not hurrying, not rushing toward the morning, simply present, in the dark, in the corner, coin by coin, as the night passes minute by minute, as sleep comes breath by breath, as the morning approaches hour by hour, not hurrying, simply coming. As everything comes that will come, in its own time, in its own way. Good night. The night is long enough. The night is long enough. This is a simple observation, but it is true. The night has enough hours for sleep. The body that lies down at the right time and lets itself rest will find enough darkness and enough quiet and enough time to achieve what sleep achieves, the repair and the restoration and the preparation that makes the next day possible. The ancient Romans slept in a night that was long enough. Marcus in his sleeping room, lying on his mat, had enough night around him for the sleep his body needed. The Egyptian farmer sleeping beside the Nile had enough night. The medieval scholar in the scriptorium, resting between the day's work and the dawn office, had enough night. The desert caravan traveller under the stars had enough night. The sailor on the middle watch, in the hours before their relief came, had enough night in the off-watch hours. All of them, in their different centuries and their different places, had enough night as you have, Enough night. The darkness around you is sufficient. The quiet is sufficient. The time is sufficient. Everything the body needs for sleep is here. The body knows this. It has always known this. Let it proceed. Let the night do what the night does, which is hold you, which is carry you through, which is deliver you to the morning, rested, sufficient, ready. The night is long enough. Sleep now. Good night. The olive oil. The olive oil that Marcus carried and cleaned and used throughout the day was one of the most important substances in the Roman world. It was the primary cooking fat, used in almost every dish, from the simplest bread dipped in oil to the most elaborate dinner preparation. It was the fuel for the lamps. The oil that produced the amber light of the Roman evening was olive oil, the same oil that went into the cooking. It was the cleaning agent. Oil applied to the skin and scraped off with the strigil was the primary method of bathing in a world before soap was widely used. The olive oil came from olive trees, which grew throughout the Mediterranean, in Spain, in North Africa, in Greece, in Asia Minor, in Palestine, in Italy itself. The olives were pressed in large stone mills and presses, the oil extracted and stored in ceramic vessels of standard sizes, traded throughout the empire. The grade of the oil mattered. The best olive oil, pressed from just ripe olives, cold-pressed quickly, was clear and mild. The oil from later pressings using heat or additional pressure was darker and more acidic. The best oil went to the finest households and the finest foods. The lesser oil went to lesser purposes, the lamps, the cheaper cooking, the larger cleaning tasks. The household where Marcus worked used adequate oil. Not the very finest, but good enough for the household's needs. The storage vessels of oil in the kitchen were part of the household's provisions, managed by the slave responsible for the kitchen, supplies used carefully and not wasted. Marcus filled the oil lamps each evening, one of the regular end-of-day tasks, ensuring that each lamp had sufficient oil for the evening and the early night. The pouring of oil into a lamp was a careful operation. The small spout of the oil vessel directed precisely to avoid spilling. The smell of the oil was present throughout this work, a specific smell, slightly fruity, the smell of the Mediterranean harvest. The lamps once filled would burn through the evening hours as the family finished their dinner and their conversations and their reading. By the time the household retired, the lamps would be low. By morning they would be empty, ready for Marcus's evening refilling. The oil cycled through the household. The press in Spain or in North Africa sent it along the trade routes. The merchant in Rome received it. The household purchased it. Marcus used it in the lamps and in the kitchen and for cleaning. The cycle repeated. The lamp, flame from the oil, gave its amber light to the room, and in the amber light the evening's work was done, and the lamps guttered, and the room was dark, and sleep came, as it comes now. In the dark that the guttered lamp leaves, the oil is spent, the light is out, the night is here. Good night. The hours before dawn. The hours before dawn were different from the earlier hours of the night. By the third or fourth hour of the night, what we might call 2 or 3 in the morning, the city's nighttime activity was at its lowest point. The night delivery carts had completed most of their rounds. The bakeries were in the final stages of their overnight work. The streets were at their quietest. In the sleeping room of the master's house, this deep middle night quiet was the time of the deepest sleep. The body had been sleeping for hours. The brain had moved through its cycles of lighter and deeper sleep and was now in one of the deep phases, the restorative sleep, the sleep in which the tiredness of the day was being processed and released. The body did not know it was 2 in the morning. It knew it was in the deep hours, the hours furthest from the demands of the day, the hours that belonged most completely to rest. Marcus, in his sleeping room, was in this deep sleep. Whatever he had been thinking about as he fell asleep, the jar of coins, the day's events, the older man from Gaul and his quiet unhappiness, the tasks of tomorrow, all of it had receded. In the deep sleep there were no thoughts. There was simply the body doing what it needed. The older man from Gaul slept too eventually. The thoughts that kept him awake in the early night hours eventually gave way to the body's insistence. Sleep came for him as it came for everyone, patient and inevitable. The young man who had been born in the household slept without complication, as he always did. All 3 of them in the deep night, in the deep sleep, in the small room that was their space. The city quiet around them, the house quiet around them, the night doing what the night does, carrying them toward morning, and you are in this same deep hour, or moving toward it. The deep sleep available, the body ready to receive it, the thoughts of the day receding, the quiet here, the rest available. Go into it. Let the deep hours do their work. The morning will be there when it arrives. For now, the deep night, the deep sleep, the rest. Good night. The painting on the wall, the fresco on the west wall of the atrium showed a garden. Painted plants, precise in their botanical detail, the painter having observed real plants and reproduced them with the care of someone who understood what they were painting. A bird perched on a painted branch, another in flight. The blue of a painted sky visible between the painted leaves. This kind of decoration, the painted garden, the illusion of greenery on an interior wall, was common in Roman houses of any pretension. The Romans valued gardens and valued the outdoor world, and in the houses of the city where outdoor space was limited, the painted garden brought something of the outside in. Marcus had cleaned the wall that held this painting hundreds of times. He knew the painting in the way you know something you look at every day without examining, thoroughly familiar, not consciously seen. But occasionally, in the early morning perhaps, when the slant light from the compluvium illuminated the fresco at just the right angle, he might notice it again, the bird in particular. It had been painted with obvious affection for the specific bird it depicted, the feathers precise, the eye alert, the whole posture of a bird genuinely observed and reproduced. The painter who made this fresco had been, in all probability, an enslaved Greek artisan. The skilled craftsmen who decorated the houses of wealthy Romans were often enslaved or freedmen. The painter who painted this bird with such care was likely someone in a position similar to Marcus's. The bird has been on the wall for many years. It will be on the wall for many more. It outlasts the painter who made it, the master who commissioned it, the master's children who were born beneath it, the slaves who cleaned it each morning. The painted bird persists. In the dark of the night it is there on the wall, invisible but present. A bird painted with attention, with care, with something like affection for the subject. Still there, as things made with care persist, as the careful work of daily life persists in the world it supports, as you persist, here, in the night, real, in the dark, going to sleep. Good night. The last thought before sleep. The last thought before sleep is whatever it is. There is no requirement that it be a particular thought, or a peaceful thought, or a thought at all. Sometimes there is no last thought. The transition from waking to sleeping is too swift for a thought to form. Sometimes the last thing is a feeling, sometimes an image, sometimes the trailing edge of something that was being thought about and then was not. Marcus, in his sleeping room, lying on his mat, had his last thought before sleep. We do not know what it was. The thoughts of enslaved people in ancient Rome are not preserved. They were not written down. They existed entirely within the minds of the people who had them, and were entirely lost when those people were gone. But a thought was there, however briefly, at the edge of sleep, and then sleep. The same threshold that everyone crosses in every century, at the end of every day. The thought that is the last one, and then the absence of thoughts, and the night doing its work, and the morning, eventually, but not yet. Now is the threshold. Whatever your last thought is, let it be the last one, and cross into the sleep that is waiting on the other side. As Marcus crossed, as all the enslaved people of Rome crossed, every night, into the sleep that no institution could prevent or control, the necessary equalizing universal sleep that claimed everyone, the threshold, cross it, now. Good night. The stone of the floor. The stone floor of the Roman house was cold in the morning and warm by afternoon and cool again by night. It was not the same temperature all day. It absorbed heat from the sun that came through the compluvium and the door, and it released that heat slowly. The floor in the room where the afternoon sun had fallen was warmer than the floor in the room that had been in shadow all day. Marcus knew these temperatures as he knew everything about the house, through daily contact, through the soles of his feet on the stone each morning, through the hands pressed flat on the floor during cleaning. The stone's temperature was information. The stone's condition, dry, damp, dusty, clean, was information. The stone of the sleeping room floor was cool at night. The room was in the back of the house, away from the sun, and the floor had not been warmed during the day. Lying on the mat with the floor beneath him, Marcus felt the floor's coolness through the thin mattress. It was not unpleasant. In summer, the coolness was welcome. In the colder months, the blanket compensated. The stone floor of the atrium had its specific texture. The mosaic, when he pressed his palm flat to check for dampness, had the slight relief of the individual tesserae. The small stones set in mortar, each one slightly different in height, creating the millimetre-scale texture of the mosaic surface. The grout between them was rougher than the stone faces. The stone floor of the kitchen was different again. Heavier stone, less fine than the atrium's mosaic, worn smooth by many feet and many years of use. In certain light you could see the traces of the wear, the slightly hollowed path from the door to the hearth, where the feet had gone back and forth 10,000 times. These floors, these surfaces, were as familiar to Marcus as anything in his life. He knew them by touch, and by sight, and by the sound of the broom on them, and by the specific effort required to clean each type of surface. This intimacy with the physical environment, the kind that comes from attending to it every day, from being responsible for its condition, was one of the genuinely particular things about the domestic slave's knowledge of the household. The master walked through these rooms and used them and lived in them. The slave maintained them and therefore knew them in a more detailed and more physical way. The floor is under you now, or the mattress, or whatever the surface is that you rest on. Known, familiar, the specific weight and texture of your own sleeping place, which you do not consciously think about, because it is simply where you are, the background, the support, and in the background, in the support, the body rests. Good night. The sound of the city through the night. The sound of Rome through the night was not constant. It changed as the night progressed. In the first hours of the night, after the day's foot traffic had ended, and before the night's wheeled traffic was fully underway, there was a brief, relative quiet. The voices of the evening, the people finishing their dinners, the wine shops with their customers, the late walkers, were diminishing. The wheels had not yet arrived in numbers. Then the wheels arrived. The wheeled traffic of the night was Rome supplying itself. The wagons and carts that could not enter the city during daylight hours came in once the sun had set, bringing the grain and the stone and the amphorae of wine and oil and the miscellaneous goods that kept the city alive. They came from the warehouses along the Tiber and from the gates where the road traffic entered. They moved through the streets on iron-rimmed wheels on stone pavement, producing the continuous sound that Juvenal described as impossible to sleep through. The drivers shouted to each other and to pedestrians in their way. The animals pulling the carts, the oxen and the mules, made their animal sounds. The load shifted and creaked. The night city was loud, and then, toward dawn, the wheeled traffic began to diminish. The loads had been delivered. The carts were returning empty to their starting points, or parking in the areas permitted for daytime storage, or moving out of the city before the dawn ban on wheeled traffic took effect. The sound of wheels diminished. In the brief interval between the departure of the night traffic and the arrival of the day's foot traffic, Rome was at its quietest. An hour, perhaps. An hour of relative quiet, the streets empty of wheels, the foot traffic not yet at its daytime density. Marcus, in his sleeping room, did not usually notice these transitions. He was asleep through most of them, or moving from one phase of sleep to another in ways that were not consciously experienced. The sound of the city was the background, and the background was simply there. The body adapts to the consistent sounds of its environment. The Romans who lived in Rome slept in Rome's sound, as a person sleeps in the sound of rain or the sound of the sea, the constant presence becoming simply the texture of rest. Your own environment has its sounds, the background sounds of wherever you are, which you also do not notice, because they are simply there, the background, the texture of your rest. And in that background, in that texture, sleep. The consistent, reliable sleep of a body that has adapted to its environment. Good night. What was true? What was true about the life of an enslaved person in ancient Rome is complex. It was true that the institution was a profound wrong, that it denied human beings the fundamental right to direct their own lives. This was true regardless of whether individual masters were kind or cruel, regardless of whether individual slaves occupied comfortable or harsh roles. The legal condition was the same, property, not person. It was also true that people lived real lives within this condition, that they formed relationships, maintained inner lives, found competence and even satisfaction in the work they did, maintained their identities in the face of the institution's attempts to reduce them to instruments. Both of these things were true simultaneously. The wrongness of the institution and the reality of the lives lived within it existed together, neither cancelling the other out. When we tell the history of Rome without the slaves, we tell an incomplete history. When we tell only the dramatic stories, the revolts, the escapes, the exceptional individuals who rose to prominence, we miss the vast majority of the experience, which was daily, ordinary, and unremarkable from the outside and full of real human experience from the inside. The ordinary days of millions of enslaved people in ancient Rome add up to an enormous mass of human experience that was never recorded and is now accessible only through the indirect evidence of archaeology and the occasional glances of ancient writers who noticed sometimes the people around them. We have been spending time with one imagined version of that experience, one person in one household on one day in one night. Not representative of all. The range was too great for any single account to be representative, but true to the general outlines of what daily domestic slavery in Rome looked like, as best as the evidence allows us to reconstruct it. And now the account is complete for tonight. The day is done, the night is here, and sleep is here. The most ordinary and most universal of all human needs, available to all of them, the enslaved people of Rome, in whatever sleeping space was theirs, available to you. Now, good night. The breathing in the room. In the sleeping room, the breathing of 3 people. 3 different rhythms, settling towards sleep at different rates. The young man who was born in this household. The quick, easy rhythm of a young person falling asleep. The breathing evening out almost immediately. The depth of sleep coming fast. The older man from Gaul, a slower settling. The breathing taking longer to reach its sleep rhythm. The pauses and the small movements of a person whose mind does not release the day as quickly as a younger person's, but eventually settling, eventually the deep rhythm, eventually the sleep that even the heaviest thoughts cannot prevent indefinitely. Marcus, somewhere between the two, not the immediate sleep of the young man, not the long settling of the older, a moderate descent into sleep. The tiredness of the day meeting the quiet of the room and producing the sleep that was needed. 3 people breathing in the dark, different histories, different inner lives, different relationships to the condition they shared. The same breath, the same dark, the same night, the same sleep. As you breathe in your night, in your dark, in your sleeping place, one more breath, and one more, and sleep. Just as it happened in that room, in that night, in that city, in that century. The same body's need, the same breath satisfaction of it. Good night. The weekly festival day. Roman slaves were not without any time that was their own. The Saturnalia, the great winter festival in December, was traditionally a time when slaves were given some relief from their normal constraints, when they were served by their masters at table, when the social order was temporarily and symbolically inverted. This was not freedom, and it was not a regular feature of the year, but it was a recognized moment when the institution acknowledged its own awkwardness. The Roman calendar also included festival days throughout the year, and on some of these days slaves might be given lighter duties or some time that was not fully organized by the household's demands. The management of slave time on festival days varied by household and by master. For Marcus, a festival day meant a different kind of day, not a day off exactly, not a day without tasks, but a day when the tasks were lighter, when the master was occupied with the festival's observances and not with the household's functioning, when there was more of the slack that sometimes appeared between the scheduled demands of the working day. On such a day, Marcus might find himself with an hour that was not assigned, not free in any legal sense, but unscheduled. What did he do with an hour that was not assigned? He might have sat in the courtyard garden of the house, if the weather permitted. The garden was not his, nothing was his, but the hour in which no one needed him was his in some practical sense, and sitting in the garden in the afternoon sun was available to him. He might have talked with another slave whose schedule also had some slack in it, not about anything important, about the day, about the food, about nothing in particular. The casual talk of people who know each other well and have no specific purpose in talking. He might have gone to one of the temples. The cult of Isis, whose temple was not far from the neighbourhood where he lived and worked, was attended by people of various stations, including the enslaved. The hour in the temple, the rituals and the community of the worshippers, was a different kind of hour from the working hours of the household. He might simply have sat in a public space, one of the many open areas and colonnaded porticos of Rome, and been present in the city without an errand and without a purpose, just present. A person sitting in Rome in the afternoon, watching the people go by. This sitting without purpose, this being in the city as a presence rather than as a function. This was a version of freedom, however small, however temporary. And then the hour ended and the tasks resumed. But the hour had been real, and the sitting had been real, and the being present in the city without assignment had been real, small, real, the hour that was his in the day that was not. The night that you have now is also something like this, the hours before sleep, the time that is between the day's demands and the next day's demands, yours, to rest in, to be in, without assignment, without purpose except the one purpose of rest. Take the unassigned hour, take it fully. Sleep. Good night. The dreams that were kept. The Roman novelist Petronius wrote a satire in which a freedman, a former slave who had become wealthy, described his life and his habits. The freedman was not a sympathetic character in Petronius's satire. He was crass and pretentious and funny. But behind this satire was a real social phenomenon. The former slave who had achieved freedom and prosperity, who now navigated a world that neither fully accepted him nor fully excluded him. The freedman in Petronius was named Trimalchio, and his dinner party, the Cena Trimalchionis, is one of the most vivid descriptions of Roman life that survives. It is a comedy, but it is also a document, evidence of what it was possible for a former slave to achieve in Rome, and also evidence of the social ridicule that attended the person who tried to cross the line between the slave class and the free class. For Marcus, Trimalchio was not a role model exactly, but the phenomenon he represented was real. Former slaves who prospered existed. The freedmen of wealthy imperial households accumulated power and wealth that many freeborn citizens envied. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus achieved intellectual eminence. The dream of freedom, the project of the peculium, the imagined future life as a libertus, was not delusional. It was based on real possibilities. It was a dream that could be kept, maintained, worked toward over years of patient accumulation. The dreams that people keep through difficult circumstances are one of the more remarkable things about human psychology. The mind's capacity to maintain a vision of something different from the current reality, to hold it carefully, to not let it be extinguished by the weight of the present, is the capacity that makes long-term change possible. Marcus, in his sleeping room, kept his dream with him as he fell asleep, not as a vivid imagining, not as a plan with specific steps, simply as a presence. The knowledge that the jar was in its corner and the coins were in the jar and time was passing and the project was ongoing. And then sleep, and in the morning the project continued, quietly, persistently, in the direction of the dream. Whatever dream you keep with you, keep it. Take it into the night. It will be there in the morning, on the other side of the sleep. Good night. The sound of the fountain near the master's house, the public fountain where Marcus went each morning to fill the household's water vessels, made a continuous sound. Water running from the aqueduct pipe into the stone basin. A modest sound, not dramatic, not the sound of a waterfall or a rushing stream. Simply the sound of water running constantly into a stone basin, the overflow running away into the channel at the basin's edge. This sound continued all night. The aqueduct did not stop at night. The fountain ran in the dark, unobserved, unneeded at that hour. The households that drew from it were asleep and not needing water, but running nonetheless. In the very quiet of the deep middle night, when the wheels of the delivery carts had diminished and the voices of the streets were sparse, the sound of the fountain was one of the sounds that remained. A person walking through the neighbourhood at that hour might hear it, the quiet, persistent sound of water running into stone. It was a reassuring sound, perhaps, the sound of the city's water system functioning without interruption, the sound of the aqueduct that had come from the hills outside the city still delivering its water, the sound of a complex thing working reliably. Marcus would hear this fountain again in the morning. He would fill the vessels again at the stone basin. The water would be the same water, or more precisely the same flow of water, the same aqueduct water arriving continuously from its source. But at this hour it was simply a sound in the dark, water running consistently, reliably, without needing anyone to attend to it, as sleep comes, consistently, reliably, without needing you to attend to it, simply arriving, as the water arrives at the basin, running, constant. Here, good night. The end of this night. This telling has been long and slow, as it was meant to be. We have followed Marcus through a working day in a Roman household, the morning fetch of water, the cleaning of the atrium, the midday errands, the afternoon preparation for the dinner, the evening service at the table, the cleaning after, the return to the sleeping room. We have thought about the range of conditions within the institution, from the educated slave in the wealthy household to the miners in the Spanish mines, and about most people who occupied the middle of that range. We have thought about the peculium and its slow accumulation, about the religious life that the enslaved maintained outside the master's household, about the children born into the institution, about the Stoic philosopher who had been enslaved and what he wrote about freedom and constraint, about what could not be chosen and what was nonetheless chosen within those constraints. And now the telling is done. The day is done. The night is here. And the sleeping room in the Roman house is quiet. And the older man from Gaul is finally asleep. And the young man is deep in his sleep. And Marcus is in his sleep. And the city makes its nighttime sounds outside. And the jar of coins is in its corner. And the mat is under him. And the night is doing what the night does, which is carry everyone through to the morning, and you are being carried right now, in this dark, in this quiet, in the same dark and quiet that held Marcus and the others in the sleeping room of a Roman house 2,000 years ago. The same dark, the same quiet, the same need for rest, the same sleep, available, now, complete, good night. The morning water, one more time. Let us go back to the morning water, because it is worth describing one more time slowly as we close the night. The morning water journey was the day's beginning. Before anything else was done, before the household was fully awake, Marcus took the vessels and went to the fountain. The streets in the early morning had a quality they had at no other time. The stone of the pavement, not yet warmed by the day, had a faint coolness that rose to the feet through the sandals. The air was fresh in the relative way of city air, not the pure air of the countryside, but fresher than the accumulated air of the afternoon. The sky above the narrow street showed a strip of pale blue where it was already light, while the streets themselves were still in shadow. He passed the bakery. The smell of bread from the open door was already strong. The bakery had been at work through the night, and the first loaves had been done for hours. The smell of bread at this hour was the smell of the city's morning, the first pleasant thing the day offered. He passed the spot where a few market stalls would set up later in the morning, empty now. The pavement there had a slight greasiness from the accumulated residue of market days, the spilled oil and the fish water and the various drips of commerce that had worked themselves into the stone. He arrived at the fountain. The sound of the water, the stone basin, cool to the touch, the overflow running away in its channel. He filled the vessels. The water was cold. It spilled slightly as he withdrew the vessel from the basin, a few drops on his hands and his feet quickly gone. The filled vessel was heavy in his hands. He turned back toward the house. The walk back with the full vessels was heavier than the walk to the fountain with the empty ones. This was the daily physical reality. You walked to the fountain light and walked back heavy, the weight of the water distributed in the vessels that you carried. He arrived at the house. He carried the water inside. The morning had begun. This is the morning water. This is the beginning of the day. And now the day has ended, and the water is in the vessels inside the house, and the house is quiet, and the night is here, and the vessels will be empty by morning, and he will fill them again. But that is morning. This is now, and now is quiet, and now is dark, and now is the sleep that comes after the water fetching, and the cleaning, and the service, and the returning, the sleep that comes after all of it. Here, now, available. Take it. Good night. The long history of ordinary people. The history that is recorded is the history of the powerful and the dramatic, the emperors and the battles and the great buildings and the philosophical debates and the political upheavals. These are what the sources discuss, what the historians preserved, what the archaeological record has made most visible. The history that is not recorded is the history of the ordinary, the daily lives of the millions of people who were not emperors or senators or philosophers, the farmers who farmed, the craftspeople who crafted, the merchants who traded, and the enslaved people who maintained the households and worked the fields and educated the children and kept the records and did all the labour that the recorded history was built on. These unrecorded lives were real. They were as fully experienced from the inside as any recorded life. They contained the same range of human experience, love and loss, competence and failure, the pleasures available within their specific constraints, and the pains those constraints produced. We have spent this night with one imagined version of one of these lives. Not representative, The range was too vast for any single account to be representative, but honest to the general shape of what the evidence suggests. And what the evidence suggests is that these lives were lives, constrained, sometimes miserable, often unremarkable, occasionally touched by the particular pleasures and solidarities that any human life contains. This is the history, not only the recorded part, the long history of ordinary people doing ordinary things in whatever conditions they were given, which includes the history of people going to sleep at night, as Marcus went to sleep, as you are going to sleep, in the same dark, in the same need, in the same fundamental condition of being human and being tired and needing rest, the long history of ordinary people sleeping, which you are part of, right now, tonight. Good night. The last good night. This is the last good night of this story. The story has been long because the night is long, and the subject deserved the time it took. But everything has been said that needed to be said, and the night is deep now, and sleep is not an aspiration but a present fact, available and waiting. The jar of coins is in its corner, the mat is spread, the blanket is adequate, the room is dark, the older man is asleep at last, the young man has been asleep for hours, Marcus is asleep, the city is making its nighttime sounds, the fountain is running, the lamps are out, the atrium is dark and still, the frescoed garden invisible in the dark. The impluvium reflects nothing being in the dark. The household shrine has its small, patient presence in the corner. Everything in the house is at rest. Everything in the sleeping room is at rest. And everything in you can be at rest. Whatever the day was, whatever is still unresolved, whatever is waiting for tomorrow, it is all at rest now, in the dark, in the night, in the same dark and night that held the enslaved people of Rome in their sleeping spaces, that held the farmers of Egypt in their mud brick houses, that held the scholars in their scriptoria, and the sailors in their bunks, and the desert travellers under the stars, and all the others in all the stories told in this slow and unhurried series, all of them held by the same night, all of them resting in the same dark. The night is the constant. You are the moment in the constant, and the constant holds you. Sleep now. You are held. Good night. The seasons of slavery. The work of the Roman domestic slave changed somewhat with the seasons, as all work in the ancient world changed with the seasons. In summer, the heat was the defining condition. The work of carrying water was heavier, the thirst greater, the effort of the midday tasks more taxing. The household moved toward the summer mode of life. Cooler rooms, less cooking at the warmest hours, the family perhaps retreating to a country estate to escape the city's intense summer heat, in which case the household slaves would accompany them, and the work would be the work of a different house. In autumn, the work included the laying in of provisions for the winter, the amphorae of olive oil, the sacks of grain, the dried fruits and the preserved foods that would supplement the market purchases through the winter months. These arrived and were stored, and the management of the storage was part of the household's autumn work. In winter, the city was cold. Not the extreme cold of the northern provinces, but cold enough that the house needed heating, which meant the braziers needed to be lit and tended and the fuel supply managed. The short days meant longer lamp-lit hours. The work of filling lamps became more significant because the lamps burned for more hours each day. In spring, the household refreshed itself. The thorough cleaning that spring permitted, The airing of rooms, the washing of linens, the scrubbing of surfaces that had accumulated the closed-in quality of winter was a significant effort. Spring cleaning as a concept was not an invention of any particular culture. It was the natural response to the opening of the year after the closing of winter. Marcus moved through these seasons as he moved through the seasons of any year, with the routines adapting to the conditions, the work varying while the fundamental pattern remained the same. The seasons came and went, the years accumulated, the jar of coins slowly filled, the work continued. And in each night of each season the sleeping room received its sleeping inhabitants, and the night did its work, and the morning came, as the morning will come for you, after this night, which is also doing its work, without your help, without your effort, simply proceeding in the way that the seasons proceed, in the way that the years accumulate, in the way that the night moves toward morning, steadily, reliably, without interruption. Sleep now, the season is whatever it is, the night is here, and the morning will come in its time. Good night. The final accounting. At the end of any life, the accounting would be taken. For Marcus, the accounting would include the years of service in the household, the tasks performed, the reliability demonstrated. It would include the peculium accumulated, the status maintained, the relationships formed. It would include whatever happened with the question of freedom, whether it came, when, how. We do not know how Marcus's story ended. He is imagined, a composite of what the evidence allows us to know about the daily life of a Roman household slave. His specific story did not survive because it was never written. What we know is that people in his situation lived through the conditions we have described. Some of them obtained freedom. Some of them died enslaved. Some of them found in their constrained lives the texture of genuine human experience, the relationships, the competencies, the small pleasures, the maintained inner lives, that made the lives worth living from the inside even when the outside condition was wrong. This is not a comfortable history. It should not be comfortable. The institution was wrong, and the discomfort of knowing that should remain. But the people who lived within it were real, and their lives had reality, and that reality deserves attention and acknowledgement. We have given it some attention tonight. In the slow, unhurried, detailed way of these stories, the way that honors ordinary life by taking it seriously, by staying with it, by not rushing past it to the dramatic parts, the ordinary life, the daily life, the life that was, and now the telling is truly done. And Marcus sleeps, and you sleep, in the dark, in the quiet, in the night that holds everyone. Good night. The quiet of the sleeping room one last time. The sleeping room is dark. The 3 mats on the floor, the 3 bodies on the mats, the 3 different rhythms of breathing, each one settled now into the deeper rhythm of sleep. The wall where Marcus's corner is, the small jar there, invisible in the dark, holding its coins in the quiet, the ceiling above, the walls around, the floor beneath, the familiar enclosure of the space that is theirs, within the house that is not theirs, within the city that moves around them, the city sounds, distant wheels, a voice somewhere, the fountain running somewhere nearby, the water that does not stop. And in the middle of all of this, the sleep. 3 people sleeping. All the things that separate them, the different origins, the different histories, the different relationships to the condition they share, set aside in the sleep that treats everyone the same. The sleep that does not know who you are or where you came from or what your legal status is or what your day was like. The sleep that simply comes when the body needs it and the conditions allow. That sleep available to them, to you. Now, good night.